Welcome to the See What Sticks Variety podcast featuring your hosts, Jake Andrews, Joe Vsauce, and Jackson Playfair.
What's going on, everybody? This is the sixth episode of the See What Sticks Variety podcast. I'm Jameson Andrews, and with my co-hosts, Joe Vsauce and Jackson Playfair. How are you guys doing on this sunny Sunday evening?
Hello.
Hello. Doing good.
Doing good.
Awesome. Well, I think our loosely based agenda is going to lead us into the cosmos and the stars. So let's hit it right to our man Joe Vsauce for some interesting insight.
Yeah, I mean, like we've been doing a lot of grounded, at home on the Earth sort of conversations in the past several episodes. So I thought that maybe it'd be interesting to check out what's above the stars or towards the stars, and what do we find cool about the cosmos. And there's so much that we can talk about. One that we kind of briefly touched upon last time, or in one of the previous episodes, was kind of like the neutrinos and like what are they about, and like particles, and really there's a ton of stuff that we could talk about. But yeah, I just want to open up the floor and say, guys, like, what do you find incredible, or what kind of what is something that piques your interest? Like, what is it about outer space that blows your mind? Like, for one thing, I watched Ad Astra last night.
Ooh.
With Brad Pitt. Very cool, very cool. Like,
Never even heard of it.
you haven't heard of it? It's basically his big cosmos astronaut movie that I think is probably on a bucket list of a lot of actors. Try and get one of those in the under the belt before their career's over. Well,
They're just handing those out nowadays, hey?
yeah, straight up. Like on Crave, it's got Ad Astra, which is Brad Pitt's, and then right after it, it's got Lucy in the Sky, which is Natalie Portman. I haven't watched that. I might watch that later tonight. But that's Natalie Portman's, where she's like an astronaut. She comes back, and she doesn't know what's like real, and like she starts losing touch with reality. But just to like have Ad Astra as kind of a kicking off point without doing any spoilers, it's essentially traveling the solar system towards Neptune. And one thing that I find mind blowing is that the space between planets is so ginormously massive. It's almost unfathomable. Like, we're talking billions and billions and billions of miles. Just think about that for a second.
Oh,
Well, I was watching some Cosmos yesterday, and I think he said in the Oort cloud, which is the bubble around our solar system that has a bunch of different asteroids floating around, each one of them is as far apart from the next one as we are from like Saturn or something. That's just bonkers.
It's crazy, man. Like, there's actually a video on Twitter. If I can find it, I'll send it over to you guys. And it's like, it shows essentially like light waves. Like, if you were traveling at the speed of light, how long it would take you to reach like certain barriers away from Earth. And the way the video is set up, it's like this timer where like a beep goes every second, and that's like one, like if you're traveling at a light year, it's like 1 light year. And dude, we are so far away from anything. It is mind blowing when you look at it in this the way the video is broken down. Like, I think it just like it really makes you realize the true barriers that we face, that are not only like, it's one thing to look out and wonder, like look at a telescope and like imagine what's out there, see what's out there, but then to actually like process the fact that people are trying to get places and go places in today's age and like time is insane. Like, the technology that it seems like we would need to have to be able to do anything that would be like feasible is mind blowing.
Yeah, like I started watching Space Force too.
Oh, dude, so good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm like 3/4 of the way through it, and it just like there's so much science, and like kudos to, to all the uh, astrophysicians, as I guess that's how you say it, or like everybody that's calculating how things move in the sky, and it's really, I feel like it doesn't get talked about a lot, but there's like, especially in mainstream media, but there is, like, they have to do calculations of months in advance on trajectories just to try and, like, get a photo of Mars or whatever. Like, they have to calculate. They have, it's just it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
No, it truly is. I think like the level of science that goes into it, and that's the thing that is like, to be an astronaut is without a doubt like it has to be like the hardest job in the world. You know?
Yeah, like, that was one thing that I wanted to be as a kid. Like, an astronaut was definitely one of those jobs that I thought would be amazing. Like, I still to this day want to be able to go up and float. Like, I guess it would be kind of like being underwater, but not really. Maybe like a G force plane or whatever those planes are that kind of simulate it. But like that, just the idea of like floating around and like how there is no gravity. Like, I think we take a lot of being on Earth for granted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's nowhere else to go.
There's no,
I don't know. Elon's got us pretty close to Mars. Not
Dude, I
really,
know
but
Elon. Isn't that's another thing I think is so funny is like, um, the idea of like privatization and just how much better shit gets done when it's privatized. Like when NASA's ran as like a space through program through the government or whatever, and like it's always just an issue of funding and like trying to justify why we need to put people in space or do this or do that. And like Elon Musk comes out of nowhere and like in under 10 years the guy's launching rockets out of like private bases, partnering with NASA. Like it's a wild it's a really wild example when you see where space is going, like mixed with where the economy of the world is going right now, you know? Like I think that like when they first put a man on the moon, if they did put a man on the moon, when they initially did that, right? That was such a like a country thing, like us versus them. We're the first ones here, and like if you do research and stuff into it, it really was like the U.S. was getting kind of pounded by other countries, specifically like Russia and the Soviet Union, with the space war, the space like the fight for intergalactic dominance, if you will. Um, and ultimately, it came down to like whoever can put a man on the moon first is going to have the image of like space dominance. And for the US, that was such a gigantic win that like I think a lot of people would like coming out of the world wars and into the Cold War and then having that win of like being the first to land on the moon. It was such a countrywide like government success for everybody. And now you see it with like launching like privatized spaceships, like going up to the International Space Station and potentially like having space tourism to an extent. Now it's like what a change, you know, like what a drastic change the world went through of something that seemed like the future back in whatever it was 1968 or whenever they land on the moon, and now we're at a point where we're like, yeah, you can pay a couple $100,000, take a trip to space. Like I think the human species is developing in a very strange way, you know.
I think
yeah.
one of the
Go ahead.
I think one of the things I like most about space is like the vastness of it. Like Joe was saying, it's just mind-boggling to think of like how big it really is, and like we can only see a small little amount of it and kind of extrapolate on its probable size. So just a couple things that kind of caught my eye is when we think about our direct location in the stars, we think of the solar system that we're in, and how the sun is just massive on a scale compared to Earth or any of the other planets. And that is a single star that a whole solar system orbits around. And then you think of how many stars are in a typical galaxy. Well, best estimates say 100 billion. And then you think of how many galaxies are there, and the lower estimate is 176 billion. So there's like 100
So
billion stars in the galaxy and 176 billion galaxies. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of people that say like you'd have to be a jackass to not think that there's life other than us, just
I'm of
based
that
on it.
mind. Like, look at how big it is. We can't be the only one in like 100 bazillion gazillion fucking stars out there.
Okay, I got something to throw to toss you guys though. So I love Vsauce. Vsauce is one of my favorite YouTube channels. The guy's name's Michael, And it's amazing if anybody is interested in just tons of mind candy. Vsauce is the juiciest YouTube channel I think I've ever found for that kind of stuff. Just because it's also variety. Like he talks about a lot of different stuff, like psychology and that sort of thing. But he's got a lot on space and the cosmos, and it brings me to think of this one particular really fascinating concept, which is the whole idea that the universe is expanding, right? So the universe is expanding and inflating in the space between everything else. So like everything is moving away from everything else at basically the same general rate, except that it's also accelerating, which is another conversation. But the whole thing about general relativity. And what I've discovered, a lot of this stuff, a lot of this knowledge is coming from like Vsauce and other various sources. So that's why we fact check. But this is coming from memory. And basically, what he says is that if you rewind, like the whole idea that we got the Big Bang, like that, where we got that from, is because Einstein was like, okay, and there's a bunch of scientists that were like, okay, everything's expanding away from everything else, like everything's accelerating. And they figure that out by like looking at really distant stars and seeing that they're redshifted. And if they're redshifted, meaning that like the time of light that it takes to is so huge for it to get to us that it kind of stretches out and goes into redshifting. So because that's how they kind of got to that idea. And so if we rewind time as far back as we can go, then that's how we end up at like a singularity, which would be the Big Bang, which is, roughly 14 billion light years in the past. That's where everything was all condensed into like a thing smaller than the size of a grain of sand. And so having said all that, here's where the like really fascinating thing is that Michael from Vsauce had demonstrated. He's like, the center of the universe isn't any one particular place, right? So it's not like you can be like over there, outside the asteroid belt or whatever. That is the center of the universe. That's actually not the case, although that's what like you'd think it would be. In fact, everywhere is the center of the universe. So he has these two, how to visualize it, and I'll do my best to try and describe it so that you can hopefully visualize it as well. Is he takes two pictures, and they both have the same. They both have the same amount of like dots, and when you overlap them, wherever you line up two dots that are like adjacent to each other, so like they're the same dot but in the two different pictures, if you line those up, that becomes the center. Okay, so and he does that and he shows that with each of the dots. So wherever you like look, that's the center of the universe based on how the physics play out. So that means literally, like scientifically speaking, that each one of us and literally and like all of our friends, we're all like, you are the center of the universe. So like mic drop. Like
Well,
scientifically
that
speaking,
is basically how people operate as is. Like
right?
that is the operation that we're all under. And that's why like when people say that like like you have a hard time finding meaning in life, like, and there's two sides of it where it's like you only see your perspective and you imagine yourself as the center of the universe, and then there's the other complete opposite of that where you realize everybody thinks that and everybody feels that. So is there a center of each individual, or is the collective consciousness the actual center and everything else is just an individual thinking that they're separated from the actual concept of the self, of the center,
Yeah, so
like
like, does that mean that Earth really is the center? Maybe not the center of the solar system, but it's actually like if we are the only living things, like just for argument's sake, let's say that we are the only thing in the entire universe that's alive. Does that make us like Earth the center? Like that says a lot about Earth, like we're a pretty big deal.
but
I think
again, I think that's oh, go ahead, Jake.
I think for this podcast, I'm gonna just put it out there that because the subject matter is so dense and there's a lot of questions surrounding like everything, let's try to not talk for long spurts because Joe
My
had
bad.
like so many things that I was like, oh my God, but then does that mean this, or what about that? And I can't
Yeah.
say any of that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But then going back, I think to what you're saying is like space has always been weird to me because like I feel like space is also like a very I don't know if this is the right word or not either, but I'm gonna say it anyways because I like to think I'm smart. It's very like metaphysical in the sense of like of the space. It's like it's also so tied into like human consciousness and the thought of like if we are more, then what does that more mean? You know, like I think that yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just I wanted to leave it open to kind of let you guys dive in on wherever you
So
want because like
interestingly enough, when I looked up like facts about an event horizon, because that's one of the things I want to talk about because I find them fascinating, is it says, what is a continuum? A continuum is nothing but a continuous sequence in which elements adjacent to each other are not different perceptibly, but at extremities they are very distinct. So in the space-time continuum, space and time are not perceptibly different. However, at the extremities they are very different. For instance, space has 3 dimensions, and time, on the other hand, has only 1 dimension, which we call the 4th dimension. And Joe had mentioned before about a redshift. So, just for the viewers, because it's kind of hard to understand what some of this very dense language is, a redshift is apparently a state where any electromagnetic radiation or even light from any object gradually increases in wavelength. This means that the light or the electromagnetic radiation is gradually shifting towards the spectrum's red end. As redshift occurs, the frequency or the photon energy is gradually lowered, which is nothing but an increase in wavelengths.
well I think then like to look at space but also tie it into the reality of because I think that a lot of times with space for people it's a hard I don't want to say it's hard because like obviously with like the spark came from TV shows back in the day with like whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars or different ideas. I think got the general consciousness of people thinking about space. You know, and I think it's just like expanded tenfold in that sense. To even now, where like Neil deGrasse Tyson's Cosmos, like everyone for at least it feels like everyone has seen an episode or seen a clip or seen something like. Is it fair to say that like space is almost like space in the conversation of space is a very like hot topic
It's like
subject right
kind
now?
of mainstream now. He
Yeah,
like
it
made space kind of cool when it was before
exactly.
very nerdy.
Yeah, and now you got like Matthew McConaughey going through different dimensions, and like you got, you know what I mean? You got Brad Pitt just embarking on this journey to go find his dad. Like you have all these crazy movies that have now become like that. It's cool, right? It's this consciousness that people are so curious to explore, and I think that says a lot about people in general, you know, like the actual state of where we are here, let alone where we think we can go out there, you know, like I think it's a lot more tied together than we give it credit.
So if
Yeah,
some
yeah.
astrophysicist wants to listen to this and tell us how wrong we are, I'm just gonna kind of put it out there that Joe's got some Vsauce sources. I got some articles I looked up, but a lot of what we're gonna say is kind of just like we're
Interpretation.
interpretation and kind of just fueling the conversation. So like one of the things that kind of brought to my head is when Joe was talking about how the start of the universe was basically smaller than a single atom, and then it exploded with like all these elements. But it's like the chicken and the egg thing. Like what happened before that? And I think the answer is probably somewhere in that it's constantly expanding. And then once it expands enough, they said it like basically snaps back like a rubber band. Everything collapses back into that single atom thing, and then explodes again, and it kind of just
Yeah. Yeah, I've
starts.
heard I was gonna say that there was one explanation that I've come across that I really like. And it's that one that you just had mentioned where it's like this, collapse and then re-expansion, collapse and re-expansion. And I remember a few years ago, I was like, when Vsauce was pumping these videos out constantly, like now he's moved on to do like more, high budget, you got to pay for YouTube Red to watch his stuff or something like that. Like he's not as busy as he was making it at home. But there was one where one time when I was talking with Dad, and I was like, "Yo, it's kind of like this," and I motioned my hand where it's like it explodes and then comes back in, and then explodes and comes back in, and then Dad said something so profound. He was like, "Yeah, it's kind of like a heartbeat."
Yeah, that
Well,
is.
And I'm
Wow.
gonna let Jackson just kind of go on to something else, but in Cosmos, they were talking about like if you look at everything from like a lattice to like a human eye to like stars in a galaxy to like the makeup of different stars, like everything seems to be like a web. So
Yeah.
it's
For
like
sure.
the universe is a big web and everything within it is a big web all the way down to like the smallest particles. It's crazy.
It is, and I think that going back to like what you're saying, like I think people often forget that like Earth itself is a living, breathing thing, right? So like when you look at planets, and like yeah, not all planets have water, and the idea that we have of what life is. I think there's the fact that there's planets in general is like there's living life out there. Like those planets are operating, they're doing something, they're serving some sort of purpose. It's just the human ability to look at things and be like, well, no, it's not conscious life, or it's not the life that we can identify with. But like if you think about it, like man, there could be hundreds of thousands of planets out there with like dogs running around or cats or like whatever type of animal that doesn't have the same type of conscious that we have, that we then feel like makes us this like next level of species that then can like wonder or think or imagine and not just live in that primitive like eat, survive, move on, whatever. But essentially, like it's, to me, there's some aspects of it that's like you can put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. Like humans forget that we're still animals. Like just because we've grown and we've evolved and we've changed and we can think and ask and have conscious and know what our actions have consequences and all these things that maybe separate us from the animalistic behavior. I think it's also very ignorant in having this conversation to not at least consider that, like, life doesn't mean life as in there's just a bunch of other people walking around on two legs, pooping out their butts and doing normal things. Like, life can be so many different things that, again, I think it's just like it'd be crazy to look at it and be like, no, we're the only life that exists in this whole universe.
There could be like, giant Spider-Men with skeletons on the outside of their body and like 6 hearts and fucking, like
100%.
possibilities
Yeah.
are endless.
Well, to kind of like touch back on like the scale of things too. That's what's so fascinating is that, like, I mean, everything is so far away that it's, if there were like, that's, I guess, the kind of problem is that like the distances between um different planets are different. Like, I mean, I guess the closest star is Proxima Centauri. I fact check that, but it's like 4 light years away. That's still, if you're traveling at the speed of light, it takes 4 years at that speed, which is the fastest you can go unless wormholes. That's how long it still takes to get there. So like that's the curious thing, right? Like there could be so much life out there, but it's just so far away that
But then
we don't talk to it.
that's another crazy idea I just had. Is like, think of it this way, like if if you shrink it down, and I know it's not an accurate scale, but like okay, like me and Joe live about 30 minutes away from each other. If there's like an ant that lives in Joe's house and he wants to meet the ants that live in my house, how the hell would he do that, dude? That's a legitimate impossibility.
Yeah.
So if somehow that ant showed up in my house and walked in my front door and started looking around, I would have no idea if that ant was from my house or from Joe's house. It's just there. So it's like, who's to say that we aren't so oblivious to the fact that, like, a modern era as we know it is what, 200 years old, 300 years old at being generous? Like, anything past that is pretty drastically different from the life that we're living right now. So
Yeah.
it's like, who's to say that something didn't show up at some point amongst that time, and we've just classified it and checked it off? Like, dude, that's why when like the biggest thing that I love about space, one of my favorite conversations is like around octopus and like the idea that they were not originally from this planet, and they show like their biological like development path showed up in a way that like came from a meteorite or something from space that then found a way
Whoa.
to grow and develop. Dude, that's a wormhole. You want to go down? Octopus are aliens.
Yeah,
Boom.
we're beyond rabbit holes now. We're going straight to wormholes, baby. I love
Yeah.
that.
Well,
But
there's
it,
a lot of people out there that think in order to like traverse the stars far enough to maybe find life, we would have to like manipulate time travel, and it's probably something to do with black holes and wormholes.
Yeah, interstellar stuff for sure.
But you'd have to have like a spacecraft that can like withstand the gravitational pull of crossing an event horizon, which probably will never happen. Who's to say though?
Yeah,
well,
dude, man,
that
I was. Oh, sorry. Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. I was just gonna say that's one of my favorite actual like UFO slash. Again, I think I might have mentioned him last time or at some point. Might have been my What's Weird last episode, but that Bob Lazar guy who worked at like a site called S4, which was like associated with Area 51, and basically the quick rundown of Area 51. They say that like there were UFOs that crash landed here, and the U.S. government took them in, essentially like ripped apart their equipment to figure out how it worked, and like they like this Bob Lazar guy does say that there were aliens inside the machine, and they were like small, somewhat human looking, but like much smaller. And anyways, the big thing that he talks about is element 115, which is this like unknown element that he claims to have like taken off the base and still has, but like the FBI and CIA and the government, all these people have never been able to find it. He's a very popular figure when you come to like UFOs and all that. But basically, what element 115 does and why it would allow space travel is that essentially turns gravity into like a fuel source, in the sense of,
Wow.
if you think about it just like quickly, but if you put a bowling ball on a bed, right, and you drop the bowling ball in the middle of a bed, like the bed would shape to the it would like form to the shape of a bowling ball. So then if you put tennis balls around the bowling ball like 5 inches away and drop the bowling ball on the bed, those tennis balls would all get pulled towards the bowling ball, right? In theory, like does that make sense? Is that painting a picture, or am I just
Yeah.
I've
rambling
seen
on
that
that now?
experiment.
Okay, so essentially what he's saying is element 115 allows you to take the bowling ball as gravity and use it so that like you put it at the front of a ship, and it pulls the ship
Pulls space time or something
through
like that.
gravity. Exactly. And so that's basically why what he's saying is the ability to then travel at these insane speeds, because once you set that directional pull, it starts to move, it just gets faster and faster and faster and faster and faster until you decide to somehow make it stop. And so that's where it's like we don't even understand gravity very well, and we got to beat
Yeah,
gravity
dude.
and then find a way to use it as a fuel source. Like it's
Yeah.
it's a big conversation, but it's so cool that we're alive in a time when the conversation is being had.
Straight
There's
up.
a theory that our universe might not be the only universe, and they're starting to find like not concrete evidence to suggest that it's true, but some weird stuff that can't be explained to suggest that it might be a plausible theory if only we could explain more. And in that case, in a different universe, the laws of physics and gravity might not be the same as ours, or even other places in the universe where the same physics don't apply. And that's just bonkers to think about. Like something, you know, our laws of physics state that certain things are just not possible, like moving through dimensions, and like a solid, uh, like an object that's solid can't move through another solid object because it meets resistance. But what if you could like go through the atoms and the particles because there's another dimension we just can't traverse, kind of thing? It's crazy to think about.
It really is, and I think that um, it just kind of again shows like this. It's such a weird place to be at, because I think that like in modern society and day we see that like electrical energy, batteries, like more efficient batteries, better ways of harnessing energy, all this stuff is starting to now leak into our life, right? Like with electric, whether it be electric cars or even just like the technology that is like consumer ready, as in like Apple products or Samsung or whatever. They're continually getting better and like and smaller, because the ability to use batteries and capacity and all this stuff is getting so much better. um, but yet we're still using like fuel and gas to power rockets. So it's like, as all that other stuff gets better, we still can't beat like the one thing that we all like with fuel, as in gas or like oil or whatever, as the most effective way of fueling these machines. Where like, I think it's not crazy to say that in 10-20 years we might look back and be like, wow, fuel was effective for the time, but like obviously battery energy is better, or obviously this type of energy is way better. Like, as that develops, it's going to be crazy to see what that then does to the ability to like use it on such a large scale like this. You know what I mean?
Dude.
Like that's where I think that the real missing part of this isn't the technology, it's just the development of the technology. Like, we need, say what you will about Elon Musk, like him or don't like him, whatever. Dude, like, we need more people like Elon Musk who are like, hey, I'm gonna go collect a shit ton of wealth and then I'm gonna spend it trying to do crazy shit. Like, I want the electric car to be what everybody drives. So yeah, right now Teslas are expensive, but ideally down the road, hopefully you can get to a point where Teslas aren't super expensive and everyone does find ways. You know what I mean? Like, all those different things, as that develops, it's gonna be interesting. Like, dude, maybe we'll be rocking, or maybe we'll be, like putting rockets and satellites into space with no fossil fuels in the next 20 years, 30 years. Like, once that happens, once these steps keep getting taken, what's the next? Like, where do we go? And I think that the sheer distance between everything is the ultimate challenge that will make people never want to stop. Like, if we could get there, people would be like, yeah, we can do it, but like, why would we want to? Why don't we want to do this or do that or whatever? Where right now it's pretty well known we can't, that we cannot do it, so people want to do it. It's like, if you tell someone they can't do something, they're going to want to do it, but as soon as you can do it, then people are gonna be like, well, whatever. Yeah, we've been to the moon. Why would we go back? It's like, anything we can't do, I think people innately want to do that more.
Yeah, like, well, what's on the other side of the moon? Like, we've seen some conspiracy theories about what might be over there. You know, we might already have intelligent life checking us out and watching, ancient aliens. And
But that's what I mean. Like, why haven't they gone back? Like, why not? Like, I don't know. I don't have the answer. I don't know. I haven't looked into it enough. I'm not conspiratorial enough to start dealing out facts. But it is this weird thing where I'm like, maybe it's not effective. Maybe there's no point. Maybe there's whatever. But like, it seems like that would be something that, like, if they live stream someone landing on the moon tomorrow, like, I'd watch that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just feel like, it's the like, we can't, therefore we must try. But there's so many. Then again, you got to look at it as like, how many people would willingly get on a one-way ship? Like,
That's a big question, dude. Like, that's kind of scary. The whole idea is like, especially because of Interstellar and time dilation. Like, without going into anything about Interstellar, there is a thing called time dilation. So, like, the faster you go, this is kind of based on what's weird in the world today that I did a couple episodes back, with like the whole speed of light thing, being like, the faster you go and the faster you get closer to the speed of light, the slower time is around you. Even though time's ticking at your normal rate for you, everything around you gets slower and slower and slower and slower. And that's kind of like, that's a serious contention of being like, okay, am I going to do this one road trip and put like my whole, like, all my families and friends and like everything I know behind me for this, this voyage of going to Mars or whatever? Like, that's a big deal, and you definitely have to have a certain kind of temperament to be able to do that, for sure.
Well, there's evidence too, and I don't know if you guys have heard of CERN in Geneva, but underneath the ground, there's a machine called the Large Hadron Collider, which is basically whipping particles around in a circular tunnel 16 miles long. And they're trying to like simulate conditions of the universe long ago. But one of the interesting insights they received from it is basically exactly what Joe is saying, is the closer you get to the speed of light, the more things slow down around you. So when people are talking about, and they have like proof to say that these atoms that they're whipping around in this tunnel, ordinarily disintegrate after just 25 billionths of a second, but when they are near to the speed of light, they last 30 times longer.
Wow.
So if you want to travel into the future, basically we just need to go really fast. So a lot of people are saying, because there's so much dark matter in the universe, if we could figure out how to use that as a fuel source, we might be able to create enough energy to make a vessel, if we could build it to withstand that speed, to go fast enough to approach the speed of light, where that's kind of how time travel would work.
Like when you think of it in that side, and this is more of an ethical thing than it is space, I guess, in a sense. But when you think of it like that, and you look at like what right now seems like impossibilities, like doesn't it seem like we should have like people dedicating their whole lives to like I know that this is more of an ethical question, but like you said, like if you were to have a ship that could do that, and it was a one-way boat, one-way ship, like, and someone was born, like as I'm asking this, I realize it's completely unethical, but is it unethical to like take somebody and be like, okay, for the next 20 years you're going to be like the person who does this for all of space, and like have a group of people that are literally trained to get to that next step that we need? Because I think at the end of the day, all the things we're talking about realistically are going to take lifetimes of people committing all their career, like, to make these little steps. Is like, I think that that's where the human aspect of, like you said, Joe, like people think that we're, or like the idea that each individual is the center of the universe. How do you convince or get a bunch of people to make this sacrifice, to be like, hey, this is going to have to be your whole life's work, and there's a good chance you won't see the end result of it?
So in my own personal opinion, and this isn't fact at all, but who's to say that, underground dark government's not actually making people dedicate their lives to that? I would say the evidence against it would be, look at the state of society right now. We can't even handle life on Earth, let alone conquer time travel and travel distant galaxies. But I mean, ethically, it's probably not the best thing to do right now, because if you somehow crack the code and led to time travel, like the state of the world right now is, it would never be used for any good, I wouldn't think.
It's so true, but it's also such a crazy it's such a crazy idea to look at, because like you said, like, so is time travel, is space travel the ultimate, like if human society is a pinnacle or a pyramid, is intergalactic space travel or time travel being something in one in its own, is that the ultimate pinnacle of like human society and species? Is that what ultimately we're trying to get to? Because I think like everything else leading up to that, and you're right, it's a mess. Like I'm putting the blinders on right now and pretending that what's going on right now isn't the level that it actually is. But like, if that was a possibility, is that not like the ultimate? And I think that in my mind, it's an aspect, but I think a ton of people would disagree with me. Like, that is kind of the ultimate of human, like, curiosity, exploration, all of those things would kind of be. So then it's like, I guess my point is like, if we could somehow get the whole world to shift and be like, okay, everyone needs to work on this one thing, would we have more like more resolution to our issues that we currently have, if the whole objective of like one priority was found for the whole species, not just like countries and individuals, you know?
Well,
What's
there's
the base?
something. Yeah,
Go ahead.
well, there's something so cool about traveling to a different planet. Uh, that, like, I think that's part of the reason why, like, I enjoy video games, right? Like, that's yeah, I go to a different place and I experience something that I wouldn't experience in my everyday life, and like, whether that is flying a spaceship up in space, or if it's meeting aliens and shooting them with shotguns. The whole thing about like going to like, there's that trade-off, like it's not clean. There's going to be some people, like kind of like what you guys were saying about the ethical problem of dedicating your entire life to go check that out, like check out another planet or go inhabit another planet. There has to be some way to mediate our lifespan. Like, there's got to be a way that we can do maybe some sort of wormhole or something that means that it's not going to be like 10 to 15 years on a spaceship until you finally get, even if you're traveling at the speed of light. Like there's got to be something, because we only live unless we can extend our lifespan some way. Technology's there though. I mean,
Well, my question would be, what would be the basis of this concentration of society to achieve this goal? And I guess it would be to escape our own doomed existence. But then who do you put on and take to the new world?
Well, that's the ultimate thing, and I think that we're kind of seeing that again. It's all connected. Ultimately, in my mind, everything is connected, and that what we're seeing right now is a collective issue that the majority of people understand and disagree with, and they understand that it isn't right and needs to go, and that's racism and its issues of inequality on a mass scale, right? So then you see these protests and riots or whatever, all these things come together. That's an accumulation of consciousnesses, individual coming together and saying we can conquer this issue if we all have a voice, if we all speak our voice, and if we all support each other. But that didn't come on such a mass scale until something triggered it, right? So I think that, going back to what you said, Jake, like I do think that ultimately, until the freaking laser beams are being pointed down on each individual city and the aliens are ready to blow Earth to a million pieces, people aren't going to be able to commit to that. People aren't going to be ready to say, okay, yeah, screw my job, screw my family, screw my all this. Let's commit to the betterment of human society. Instead, I think the issue is always going to be that people think that they're the center of the universe, and people want the spotlight in their own individual ways. And I'm not trying to say that that's good or bad. I'm a part of that rat race. I'm not shitting on it by any means. I'm just saying, I think that for how dark and gloomy it is, like until it is a species wide, like wipeout, doom, gloom situation, I don't know if we have the ability to peacefully, collectively all agree that this is something that we should be pursuing on an actual, like, let's make it legitimate scale, right?
like, what if we just made robots that did it for us, right? Like, for instance, like, why do we have to send people? Like, I guess, like, we could send, but if we could get robots to the level of being like, okay, we're going to send a robot through this wormhole and see if he can send a video of him smiling back at us from 7D3209 or whatever the fuck planet he goes to, millions of light years away. But like the whole thing, I think for me, like, just as my opinion, I think that it would just make sense that we just wait until we know that it works, because that's a tall order, kind of like what you're saying about like, or in the whole ethical problem of like sending people to maybe their deaths or never come back to Earth. I don't know. I feel like technology is getting to a place that, maybe we can extend our lives, but also we could probably just probe those planets that we're thinking about going to or what have you with robots. Like, we've already been basically doing that with Mars and all these rovers and all that sort of stuff, which is amazing. But like, are you ready to go and try and make potatoes on Mars? I don't know. Like, I'm
Here,
not.
follow me down the wormhole, boys, or the rabbit hole, the rabbit wormhole. So if we're thinking about how to like logically, hopefully get to the next point of where time travel is like an approachable thing, it says here the fastest manned vehicle in history was Apollo 10. It reached 25,000 miles per hour, but to travel in time, we'd have to go more than 2,000 times faster. To do that, we need a much bigger ship. There's some planets that we haven't discovered yet, but we know it's true. Earth, for example, is made up of all of the elements that crashed into the Earth from different asteroids during the formation of our planet. But there's other planets that they said, like, it rains uranium or it rains like titanium. And there's probably element minerals that we haven't discovered yet. So it's up to us to find those minerals and then, hear me out here, we slingshot those new elements into like a black hole and record what happens to them somehow and see if it can withstand the gravitational pressure without like disintegrating. And as soon as we found that element or that mineral, you make the ship out of that and then you send robots in it. at the thing and then record if they get to the other side. Like, does that make any sense?
Dude, like, well, it makes me think. I was watching PBS Spacetime. It's a YouTube channel. It's brilliant, and I've mentioned it before. One of the more recent videos, they've been doing this like little series on black holes and event horizons and that sort of thing. And they were talking about how very, very cool. A white hole. You guys heard of like a white hole before? So it's like the opposite of a black hole, like spits out stuff from whatever a black hole sucks up, right? So what they were saying on this PBS Spacetime was that a white hole is actually a black hole in reverse in time. So like if you were going backwards in time, that's what a white hole is if you're looking at a black hole. So this is starting to get already difficult for me to contain into a sentence. But what I was trying to get to was that they explored the idea of uh, going through the black hole. If you could make it to the other side of the black hole, the time and space switch roles once you're inside a black hole. So this is what some of the physics have been describing in the past century, is that like if you're, no matter what you do, and you're still going towards the singularity when you're inside a black hole. So like if you're going left or right, you're actually going left or right in time, and space is like space becomes time and time becomes space. So it's just such it's just it's like it's
Do you mean that in a physical sense?
in
Like,
a
because
physical sense, yeah, like physically
what, time
speaking.
would become three-dimensional and space would become one-dimensional? Like, how the fuck would that work?
Yeah, I know, right? Like, but that's what they're saying, and so because that's the case, you can actually manipulate your trajectory inside the black hole and get popped out this white hole in the past that actually links you to another universe. So this whole like going to a black hole and ending up in a different universe is actually like a thing. Like it's a thing that they have like physics and like graphs and all these sorts of things that describe how that is like theoretically possible. So
So
like
is that how
it's
the Millennium Falcon did it?
maybe,
Yeah.
That opens up a whole wild idea and theory from, I guess, the idea of life and death in itself, right? Is like if you think about that, if that's a reality, what if like the idea of your consciousness and your soul and the being that you are minus like the body that you inhibit, what if like when you die, that is essentially what happens? Your consciousness idea of self gets sucked into a black hole, and you go through this like warping of time and space to then come out, because like that's one thing that I've always pondered with the idea of reincarnation, right? Like
yo,
um because I believe that I believe in like without getting too religion-y or deep into those conversations, but I believe that there is a collective whole or a consciousness of something bigger than the idea of individual self mixed within the experience that we're all experiencing. But the more that I realize and look into different ideas of like non-dualism or dualism and different concepts and stuff, I think that the two questions I've always had that are very different in the sense of self and God or heaven or all these concepts without going too deep are two things. One, if reincarnation is a thing, do you become reincarnated and pick up in the timeline of what you're in right now? So if I was to die, knock on wood, but if something happened and I passed away within the next, month, am I going to like be reborn into something that is, July 13th, 2020, or can I be reborn in November 1st, like 1213? You know what I mean? Like, is the
yeah,
timeline linear, or is it you get dropped in at a place where you need to learn your lessons? And
yo,
then before I want to hear answers to that, but the other thing I wonder is if that's not real, if reincarnation is not a real thing, and if there is an actual physical afterlife, whether it's heaven or whatever you want to view it or look at it as, what body do you take to that other place? Like if you die when you're 99 years old and you can't walk and you can need help to breathe and write and do everything, and you die at 99, do you go to heaven as a 99-year-old man, or do you go as your 20-year-old athletic, run around, feel great self?
I
Like
would
what?
think you would go as a soul, which souls are, in my opinion, like eternal, and they're just the essence of who you are, and not any fixed time in your life.
It's
And
really
then
Yeah,
interesting.
the personality that you are, and your soul probably drifts until, if reincarnation is real, it enters another body that is created through life, which would boggle my mind because how do you pick that? Or like, is the essence of a birth of a life much more than just like the physical? Does it come down to something as spiritual as like a soul? But I don't know. Those are the questions that I kind of think to myself.
Yeah, like
yeah.
it's really heavy stuff to think about that, because like there's a couple of things that come to mind like with reincarnation too. Is that part of me is like, wow, that's so cool, like past lives and like have another life after this one, and I think that's really cool. But like at the same time, I get this kind of like nagging idea of like, I kind of like the idea of being the first me, and like who I am is like I'm a fresh soul or like a fresh being. Like there's something that's like kind of scary or spooky to think that like I have like so many different families and like all these, like, I don't know, like that's just kind of like kind of where I'm coming from. My opinion is just like, I like my family, so like you know what I mean. I don't want to like reincarnate into something else and fucking, unless it's not a human. Who knows? What if we reincarnate into an alien on a distant planet? We're not even on Earth. You know what I
Okay,
mean?
check this out. So, say if like souls are real, and segueing into the existence of possibly ghosts, I would say like, okay, you die and your soul goes to float. Maybe heaven is like just the universe where all the souls are floating and you can interact with all the other souls. But say you're tormented, your soul is like the ghost things that we hear, or see, or whatever, coming back for some sort of purpose. And I've been watching a lot of Supernatural, but um, like, I don't know. Do you guys think that heaven's something as simple as like some another dimension or some ethereal plane where souls
Well,
go to fucking ground? Or
here's like a trippy, weird idea that I mean, I think that I completely agree. I think if there is an afterlife known as heaven or understanding that is something similar to that, I do think that like you go as your soul, as your ultimate being. But then I don't know if you guys have ever heard anything about it's called like the Michael's teachings, and it's essentially um, a guy that was channeled, like, which again is a whole nother ballpark, channeling of beings and spirits and all that stuff that we can get into on a different podcast. But essentially, this guy talks about that each there's 7 levels to this to the soul age. So each age that you're living in currently in this life, your soul is at a certain age. So the first level is infant soul. So like at infant soul, you're very like everything's fresh, you have a purpose, but at the same time it's very simple. Like you live life, you get hurt, you don't have the ability to look at things from a different perspective or from a bigger, wider range, I guess. And the idea is that you have to live through all of these levels of the soul and you develop at your own pace. So like you can live 10 lives at infant soul before you take the next step to I don't know what the next soul is here. I'm literally just looking at it now, but it's a concept that I've like discussed with a few people, and the idea is that like your soul level moves along at the pace that you move along, depending on how you interact in the world that you interact in. And if you don't, I guess, level out of that soul level before you pass away, then you come back at that same level of infant soul. And then there's like young soul. I'll find them all here in a second and dial them out. But that's another way of looking at it. That's like kind of leveling through um, your soul being, and then they have different types of personality souls of like either warrior, scholar, and depending on how you are, it affects the way your soul works. And then there's like priest, who like the priests like to get through each soul level as quickly as they can to try and get to the ultimate. Like the idea is once you reach the ultimate soul, then that's when you return to the quote unquote God, and you realize that it's all oneness and you are no separate than the higher being or power or whatever. But that's always been an interesting concept for me, that like it's almost like a stage thing that you have to work through depending on where you are at in your life as a whole, and your soul almost develops over. Again, it kind of eliminates the concept of time, right?
Yeah, it's apotheosis. I love that word.
Very
It's
much.
such a cool word. Is becoming, one with the great deity, or the most great, whatever you think that might be. And that's a whole podcast that we can explore what that might be. Like, what is God? Like, what do we think God is? Like, because I think that's a conversation that also needs to happen, right? Like, there's so many people just willing to discount that it's just a dude, that just completely discount God at all, because they're like, oh, well, they associate that with like some white dude up in the sky with a giant beard that's just judging us. He's basically Santa Claus. But you know like, I think that's a conversation that, like, it is worth exploring, because I don't think it's as simple as just being like, oh, it's some being, or I think it's more than that. There's so much there. And back to like the universe, like the part of me like thinks that, well, I mean, the Rene Descartes is a philosopher of 1500s, Renaissance philosopher. He described like God as being the most great thing, the greatest thing you could possibly conceive. And so when I discovered that, I was like, okay, well, what is that then? There's got to be something that I can, the greatest thing. And so, like, right now, like, scientifically speaking, I think that that's probably like the universe. Like, what do we know is like the most incredible, greatest possible thing we can even hold in our mind? Well, like, to me, that's the universe. And we know that the universe exists because it's like science and stuff. So,
What created the universe, though?
well, that's the thing is there's when, like, now going into like psychedelics, and like that one DMT uh documentary that Joe Rogan did, and how, like, watching these people, they're like, okay, well, like, I saw this like shiny void, this like goop that was like the basis of everything. And so,
That's
like,
just
that's sort of,
out of
it's
our brain, though.
yeah, it's formless, but like, that's kind of what the whole thing about being eternal is. Like, it's uncreated, because it just, like, it always is. And that's it. There's so much to discuss and
Here's,
unpack with that.
here's another cool, interesting insight: is that through discovery of science, we know that everything within the universe never comes in singles. Everything in the universe, whether it comes down to the smallest piece of matter having an opposite piece of antimatter for it, is everything comes in pairs. So if everything comes in pairs, how can we like say that the universe is a single thing? That's why a lot of people think there's got to be a multiverse, because the evidence that we've seen anyways suggests that nothing comes in a single.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
the duality is it. Hmm. It's
so
so tasty.
there's another cool thing that in the creation of the Big Bang and the universe, it was thought that it exploded into equal parts of matter and antimatter. And then it's like, well, then how did everything get formed, and how did they not just cancel each other out? So the real MVP of the universe seems to be these things called neutrinos. And they think that neutrinos altered the course of the universe by, at the start of it, there were equal parts of matter and antimatter, but neutrino interactions may have tipped this delicate balance, enabling the formation of galaxies, stars, and planets like our own Earth.
Yeah, dude. There was I don't know if there was a YouTube or an article that it was recent that I think it was a YouTube channel. It might have been Seeker, or another one of those channels, those science channels on YouTube. But they were talking. I'm pretty sure it was Seeker, and they were saying that, like, perhaps neutrinos. Okay, so there's like this thing called like a spin, right? So like it's just a term that um, scientists use to describe how it's kind of like rotating, but it's not quite that. It's like, it's kind of vague. But the point is that, like, there's a spin. So there's like a left-handedness and a right-handedness. So depending on how a particle is moving, it can either spin left-handedly or spin right-handedly. And they're saying that, like, what that neutrinos, it's asymmetrical. So, like, for a lot of stuff, things are like, there's supposed to be like a symmetry, kind of like the duality thing that bringing up. Like there's always like a pair of things, that antimatter and matter, and those, there's always like a symmetry between like going forward in time, backward in time. Physics still works the same and that sort of stuff. But for some reason, neutrinos, they perhaps might actually spin differently if they're going forwards in time, or if they're right-handed and they're antimatter, they spin not symmetrically, and that might have pushed uh, the matter to kind of overtake. So kind of to unpack a little bit of what you were saying there.
Well, and the thing is too, like we didn't know about neutrinos, which are probably like, if we could understand them better, we might really understand the universe on a much larger scale. But there's particles that we're recently discovering, like quarks and gluons and neutrinos and stuff, that um, they take it to like the dark matter theory, and apparently it's approximately 85% of the matter in the universe is dark matter, and dark matter is thought to be composed of some as yet undiscovered subatomic particles. So there's some shit going on in the universe that we just don't have the grasp of knowledge to understand.
Yeah, and but it's so much fun to try, you know what I mean? Like I feel like a lot of people are like, "Oh, we'll never know, so what's the point?" Or like you're never going to know everything. But I don't think that's like for myself, like and partly what like this whole discussion is about is that like there's so much fun and entertainment to be had by just exploring it, like trying it. Like yeah, for sure, like definitely we're not going to know absolutely everything, because if we did, then I guess we'd be God or whatever. But we don't know that, and so because we don't know stuff, it's so much fun to try and explore it and try and like really push what our brains can even like comprehend, because I don't know, it kind of makes me tired and wants to take a nap, but it also feels like I'm doing something, and also like who knows, because like I remember there's a conversation that one of my friends from back in Kingston, we were talking about this, and me and her, you know, we were smoking some weed, so that can sometimes help catalyze and stimulate the conversation when we talk about this sort of thing. But you know, like we were talking about how oh geez, I said weed and then I lost my train of thought.
Well, let me give you time to think up what your thought was. So a couple cool facts about neutrinos is um, neutrinos are the second most abundant particle in the entire universe, with photons being the number one. If we are to take a snapshot, we'd see that every cubic centimeter of the universe has approximately 1,000 photons and 300 neutrinos. And neutrinos are such a mysterious force, but a couple cool things we do know about them is they let us see inside the sun. The light that reaches Earth takes 10,000 to 100,000 years to escape the thick plasma of the sun's core. When light reaches the solar surface, it freely streams through open space to our planet in only 8 minutes. Neutrinos provide us a penetrating view into the core of the sun, where nuclear fission powers the sun. They take only 2.3 seconds to escape the solar surface and then 8 minutes to reach Earth. And neutrinos dissipate more than 99% of a supernova's energy. Certain types of stellar explosions lose nearly all of their energy through neutrinos. These core collapse supernova end as either a black hole or a neutron star. Neutrinos are used to understand how supernova explode and tell us more about other astronomical objects.
Yeah, like you were saying,
There's
they're
something
like
on there.
yeah, there's something serious about neutrinos. But I remember what my thought was real quick, and I want to like see what you guys think about this. So we were talking about like black holes and this sort of like, you know, infinity and all these sorts of things, and I kind of thought about something. I was like, well, wait a minute here. To me, and you know, I could be completely wrong about this, and I'm sure I am, but it's still fun to think about and maybe explore. Is to me like the mind sort of has a lot in common with the black hole and you know, infinity. Like they say that like, oh yeah, like everybody's, it's all finite and everything, you know, has a certain amount of like, you know, arrangements that particles can be in and that sort of stuff. We're all finite, we're made of finite things, you know, we live, we die, we're not eternal, and what all that sort of stuff, like at least our bodies anyway. But I started thinking about like the mind, and I was like, wait a minute, there's something kind of like, it almost feels like the mind is like a black hole, but like for information, you know, because like where does it go? Like we're listening to ourselves talk through these microphones, and like you're getting information, and it almost feels like a singularity. Like there's an event horizon. Like you're gonna get like soaking in information. And there's something that I remember mentioning to her. I was like, hey, it almost feels like, your mind is an infinity, because like, even if you can't shine the flashlight on like all knowledge at all times, that is obviously the case, but as soon as you're presented with something, right, you can still hold it in your mind, and you can still continually like absorb information and continue. Like there's a cap, I guess. There's a cap, actually. I just reminded myself as during this conversation, that there's like an amount, there's like a hard drive. If our brain was a hard drive, there's only so much information that it can actually hold, which I guess there's where the limitation is. But what those thoughts are is kind of like limitless, right? Like you can almost think of an infinite amount of things when you really think about it. So I thought that was kind of cool. I thought maybe you guys think about that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's such a crazy. The mind is a whole other thing, which like you don't need to go to space to try and turn around and figure out what the hell is going on inside of everybody's mind. But honestly, this whole talk and all the stuff that we talk about, and for how out there and whatever every topic and an idea seems, you're right, Joe. I think that one of the things that we talked about when we were starting this podcast, that we really enjoyed about the three of us, is that one of us could have an idea or whatever and bring it up, and we know that the response from the other two people isn't going to be oh, I don't know, I don't think about that kind of stuff, or oh, I don't know, that stuff doesn't really interest me, or you know what I mean. Like I think that what we do a decent job of, and what we enjoy talking, and why we plan and hope that people are going to enjoy listening, is because when a concept or conversation comes up, we like to dive into it and go into it. And to me, those are like almost the worst type of characters in the game of life, are the people where you're like, oh, what about this crazy idea? And the person's like, yeah, no, I never thought about that. It's like, if game is really a game, and if you look at the talking about protons and how you can actually grab a piece of the universe and know how many protons and different things are in that piece, it's so like simulation theory, game theory to me, that like when you slowly continue to break it all down, it's all can be like numbers or scientific or math equations or whatever that break down the reality of the unknown. And to me, like those people that just don't think about these things, or don't ask the questions, or don't ponder and look off and wonder, they're kind of like non-interactive characters in a video game. Like they're just, you're going down your path, and while you're playing the game, you're trying to learn all this stuff and gather all this information and do quests and do journeys and level up and hit milestones. And then every once in a while, there's just like the farmer picking turnips in the middle of the scene, who just has nothing to do with the game development. You know what I mean? And like those people exist in real life, and those people are a part of the collective universal consciousness that makes us all be one thing. It helps humans and the species together be one, what I believe, one consciousness, which is you have your own individual feelings, but collectively there is one consciousness that oversees the development of human life as a whole. But inside that consciousness, you do have people that are just like, nah, not gonna think about it. That's not my job. That's not my life. I don't believe that. I don't this. I don't whatever. And I think that looping back to what you said earlier, and the whole point of this conversation is like, whether we sound like three incoherent, rambling madmen, or whether we sound like three guys who got our shit together, who are actually talking about something interesting, the important piece is having the conversations and like moving that pencil, moving that line slowly further and further ahead. And like the technology and the understanding and all that is developing as we go. And just like a way that I always look at that, and like when we talk about space travel, or we talk about the idea of understanding the mind, or understanding black holes, or this or that, it's a much more smaller version of it. But like, if like yesterday I got an Apple Watch, and so I've been like exploring it, checking it out, doing different things, whatever. And I literally just had a thought where I'm like, if you took an Apple Watch and dropped it in like 1940, 1950 and put it on someone's wrist, it would blow their minds. Like just the fact that they have an interactive screen, you can touch different things, whatever. And that's only 60 years. Or now I guess we're at 80 years. It's 80 years. But like 80 years from today, the development that we're going to take is like, that's the cool projectile to look at. And I think that it's like, I think that curve was always going up if you look at it like on a graph. And I think over the past like 10, 20, 30, 40 years, that graph is like sharply turned up. And I think that we're continuing to go now up because people like us, people like the general public, people that are just out there being people are having these conversations, and they're asking, well, why not talk about it? Why not think about it? Why not see what comes the more we think about it? And again, mixing it all back into the whole like theory, idea, belief. If we are a collective consciousness, the more individual consciousnesses that are speaking about this stuff, the more it formulates into something real, I think. No?
I would say
Yeah, dude, that's straight up.
I just think we're on a good path, I guess, ultimately, is my whole point of saying is like, at the end of the day, I think we're heading in the right direction. Now, where that direction is going to go isn't clear, but I do know that from what I've learned and understand and really learned over the past few years, like if you don't let your mind wander and wonder, then you're really just running down this like the rat race that doesn't really seem to have a beginning, middle, end.
Well, it's really interesting because, like, you know what it makes me think of is it makes me think of this whole woke culture right now, right? Like everybody kind of like, well, not everybody. I don't want to generalize too much, but like a lot of people, like, really ascribe to that woke mentality. Like, oh, you're woke. Like that's a cool thing now, right? And like it kind of speaks about like what you're talking about, like people like it's not taboo to talk about these conversations as much as it was perhaps in in more in the past, I guess, with you could get called a witch and burned at the stake or whatever the hell, but and I feel like there's a lot of people that, like, as many people are like, oh, I don't want to talk about it, or I don't think about that kind of sort of stuff. There's still like a general consensus in our culture right now that's moving towards that, I guess, more spiritual, like meditation. Eastern philosophy has had a huge, like, there's this whole industry on self-help books that are not just how to be practically good for yourself, but also like meditation and spiritual yoga and these things. Like it's a fad almost, in the sense that, like, people are jumping on it like it's in fashion to try and be more vegetarian or more ethical in how you eat, and having more consciousness associated with what you do in your everyday life. And I feel like a lot of people that push away from exploring the unknown, which I think what we're trying to really do, and I think we're doing a lot in this podcast, not just this one, but like kind of the whole podcast in general, is that we're trying to explore that unknown. And we're still we're three young dudes, and we're trying to figure stuff out. And we enjoyed this kind of conversation, and to be honest, like it feels so good to talk about it, and people want to be woke, and it's like, well, let's get woken up together, or whatever.
I think keeping in mind like our time restrictions for today, I got a couple facts about space that could be probably a good way to bookend this if you guys want to hear them, and then we'll transition
Absolutely.
segments here. So one of the things that I heard on Cosmos that I don't want to misquote him or anything, but one of the cool facts is that at some point, the Andromeda and the Milky Way galaxy are going to collide in 3.75 billion years. So we're not going to see it, but they said that none of the planets or stars or anything will collide because they're actually like so far away from each other. It's just going to be this milky soup of coagulation where they all just like meld together into this giant elliptical galaxy.
Yeah, I think there's the simulations and pictures where they show where it might look like in the sky, like it's approaching. It's pretty trippy.
So I got some other cool facts for you. I'm just gonna rattle them off. Hopefully we can have another space discussion. I'm sure we will, where we can maybe dive into some of this. But just some cool facts for you. Space is completely silent. I think a lot of people know that, but there's no atmosphere in space, which means that sound has no medium or way to travel to be heard. Astronauts use radios to sustain communication while in space, since radio waves can still be sent and received. The hottest planet in our solar system is 450 degrees Celsius, which is Venus, It has an average surface temperature of around 450 degrees Celsius. Interestingly, Venus is not the closest planet to the Sun. Mercury is closer, but because Mercury has no atmosphere to regulate temperature, it has a very large temperature fluctuation. Another one, there may be a planet made out of diamonds. As space facts go, this is actually pretty impressive. Research by Yale University suggests that a rocky planet called 55 Cancri E, which has a radius twice of Earth's and a mass 8 times greater, may have a surface made up of graphite and diamond. It's 40 light years away, but visible to the naked eye in the constellation of Cancer.
Worth trillions upon jillions of dollars.
No, but you bring that much back and it won't be worth anything. But that's another. If two pieces of the same type of metal touch in space, they will permanently bond. This incredible fact is also known as cold welding, and it happens because the atoms of two pieces of metal have no way of knowing they are separate. This doesn't happen on Earth because of the air and water found between the pieces.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, that's a chair.
There's floating water in space. Astronomers have found a massive water vapor cloud which holds 140 trillion times the mass of water in the Earth's oceans, somewhere around 10 billion light years away, making it the largest discovery of water ever found. The largest known asteroid is 965 kilometers or 600 miles wide. Discovered by an Italian astronomer in 1801, the dwarf planet Ceres was the first and largest object to be considered an asteroid. It is located in the asteroid belt between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter and accounts for 33% of the entire asteroid belt's mass. The moon was once a piece of the Earth. The theory is that when Earth was a relatively young planet, it was struck by a giant object, and this collision broke a piece of the Earth away to create the moon. This piece then began to orbit the moon as a result of its gravitational pull. The sun's mass takes up 99.86% of the solar system. Made of 3/4 hydrogen and helium for most of its remaining mass, the sun accounts for that amount of the mass in our solar system, with a mass of around 330,000 times that of Earth. There's the final one. There's a volcano on Mars 3 times the size of Mount Everest. At 600 kilometers wide and 21 kilometers high, Olympus Mons is a volcano on Mars that may still be active. It is the tallest peak of any planet in the solar system. However, the Rhea Silvia central peak on the asteroid Vesta is taller at 22 kilometers.
That's like Mars's nipple.
The nipple of Mars.
All right, having absorbed all those facts, we'll give it another couple of minutes just to unpack anything. Do you guys want to say anything before we transition?
I had one thing where you were saying about the packet of water. It reminded me of they've discovered that there's like a nebula cloud or something that's like made out of ethanol and raspberry, like the chemical that makes raspberries. I'm pretty sure it's raspberries. Smell and taste like raspberries. So there's like a big cloud of booze and raspberries out there that, like, if you flew through that, it'd be
Take me.
Yeah, you'd be drunk pretty good and you feel good.
Jackson?
No, I think that we did a pretty good job of keeping it nice and wide today. And yeah, space is nuts, man. I think space is like always the conversation that should be continually had and questioned and wondered. And I don't know, if you don't think that there's life outside of this ball of dirt hurtling through the air, then I think you need to step outside your backyard and look around a little bit, because there is, for sure. I'm putting it on paper. I know for sure. I'm saying there's for sure life outside of Earth.
It makes me want to buy a telescope, to be honest.
I've wanted to do that too. My parting thought before we transition into our segments is going to have to be another podcast topic at some point, which will probably require some research. But the scary fact is, as little as we know about space and everything that's out there, we actually know a significant amount more about space than we do our own oceans. So that might be something we have to dive into.
Yes, dude. I go deep on that.
Dive into you frame the way you.
I didn't even mean to do that. All right, here, boys.
It's time for lightning round. It's time for lightning round. It's time for lightning round.
Ooh, go another edition of Lightning Round. So my ass has got the privilege of asking these two some space-related trivia. So some of it might be true or false. Some of it might be multiple choice, or just give me the answer. Looking around to find space trivia, it's actually harder than it seems to find stuff that's not like totally out there and unanswerable. So I'll do my best. We'll grab the first 11 that catch my eye. You boys
Let's do it.
okay. This is an easy one just to get us started. Which of the choices below is a moon of Jupiter? Pluto, Venus, Sauron, or Io?
Ooh, I'm gonna say Sauron because it sounds dope as shit.
I'm gonna go with Io.
It is Io.
Boo.
Ba-bing, ba-bing.
Nice.
Without looking it up, which is the nearest planet to the sun? It is Mercury.
Shit.
Which of the following is not a star constellation? Pegasus, Era, Scutum, or Halo?
Go ahead, Joe.
Scutum.
I'm gonna say. What was the second one?
Era.
Yeah, that one.
You are both incorrect.
Shit.
So out of the two remaining, I don't know if I should just skip this one because it's it's just down to two questions. I'll throw it over to Jackson since he's behind. Give me another guess out of Pegasus and Halo.
Oh, I'm gonna say Halo.
It is Halo.
Hey, I'm so smart.
How many planets in our solar system are made from gas?
Oh, 0.
4.
It is 4.
Oh shit.
Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus.
Yep. Nailed it. I don't know how you knew that, but
Yeah, I don't know how you knew that either, Joe. You want to
P-
explain how you
PBS.
do that, Joe?
PBS space time, boys.
The Google machine.
No.
what is the only planet not named after a god?
Earth.
Yeah, I was gonna say Earth.
It is Earth.
Ah. Earth means dirt, doesn't it?
It's Terra, but yes, basically.
Yeah, Terra is such a cool name too. Terra.
Okay, so Joe's ahead 4-1 after 5 questions. So I'm gonna let Jackson answer the next one first and give him a chance to get back into it.
Nice.
What planet is the densest in our solar system?
The densest.
Has an average density of 5.2 or 5.52 grams per cubic centimeter.
Whew.
That's a good one.
I'm gonna say Mercury.
Incorrect. Joseph.
Densest. Earth?
Are you looking this shit up?
No, dude. I'm trying to compare. I'm like, okay, if it's a gas, that's 4 of them that it can't be. Because
If I hear a click clack of a button during your answer, I'm just gonna automatically give it to Jackson.
I swear to God.
Earth was gonna be my guess, but I feel like it was too. I guess Earth on the last one. So I don't want people to think I'm an idiot. I'm not an idiot. I just don't know these answers. Okay.
If you were standing on the moon and the sun was shining on you, what color would the sky be? Jackson, I'll let you answer first.
Ooh. If you're standing on the moon and the sun was shining on you, what
color would the sky be?
I'm Fuck, man. I don't know. Black? Like,
It is black.
yeah.
It is.
Nice.
It's funny because it's not actually a color, but sure.
Because at first I was gonna, yeah, it's a shade black. I was gonna say blue, but then there's no like ozone, so it wouldn't be blue, right?
The sky is black when the sun is shining on the moon because the moon has no atmosphere.
Yes.
Oh, yo,
Like,
they know what that makes me think
smart.
of? Dude, because there's a scene in Ad Astra where he crosses they go to the moon. It's in the first chunk of the movie, but they cross the part where like the sun isn't shining anymore, and the stars all show up when it's like nighttime on the moon, right? So like that kind of may explain away why we don't see any stars in that like moon landing or whatever, because they were on the friggin' the sun's light blocks out all the stars so you can't see them, so it's just black. Just food for thought.
All right, so we're 7 questions in. I think we're actually 8, but I'm gonna say 7 because he's still 3 behind. About how often does a lunar eclipse occur? Once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, or 5 times a year?
Ooh. I'm gonna say once a year.
Incorrect. Joseph.
Oh, yeah, that's stupid. I know the answer now.
5 times a year?
Incorrect.
It's twice
Jackson.
a year.
It is twice a year.
Yeah, because the world revolves. Yeah, okay, that makes so much sense.
Okay, I'm just looking at one that's not easy because so you should hear this. Fucking some of them are like, what planet is sometimes called the red planet? I think we know that one, genius.
Venus.
What layer of the atmosphere is the hottest?
Ooh.
If nobody gets it, we'll just move on to another one.
Dude, I don't even know what layers of the atmosphere are. I did not pay attention.
Here, I'll give you some options.
Yeah.
So is it the exosphere, the thermosphere, the mesosphere, the stratosphere, or the troposphere?
I'm gonna say stratosphere.
Incorrect. Joe.
I'm going to say thermosphere just because it's got thermal in it.
It is the thermosphere.
Yes.
All right, so 6-3 after 9. Joe's got the win in the bag, but we're gonna play it out.
Shit.
Some of these are just so easy. I'm sorry if I'm taking long. I can't do some of these.
It's okay. It's fun.
Okay. What are Saturn's rings mostly made of?
Diamonds.
Incorrect.
Dust.
That is one of them. Can you name the other 2?
Ooh. Rocks.
That is another one. First person to guess the third one.
Dust.
Ice.
Rocks. Oh,
It is ice.
Yes.
You guys are smart.
That's pretty crazy. That means that there's water like floating around Saturn.
Yeah, someone should.
Yeah.
It.
A lot of people thought that it was like actual solid rings, but no, it's just little pieces of ice, dust, and rock. Which of these is the brightest nebula in the sky? The Eta Carinae Nebula, the Dumbbell Nebula, the Nigik Nebula, or the Orion Nebula?
Orion.
That's gonna be my guess.
It's the Orion, yeah.
Yeah. Gotta be quick on the draw, bro.
The Eta Carinae Nebula contains some of the brightest stars in our entire galaxy. All right, so Joe takes the win. Line up your epic rant.
I got a nice one.
We're gonna transition into
What's weird in the world today? What's weird in the world today?
So what's weird in the world today? Either one of you can take the baton here.
Go ahead, Jackson, because my what's weird in the world today kind of links towards my rant.
Oh shit. All right. I was not necessarily ready for this.
Okay, I'll go first then.
Yeah, you go ahead.
All right, so if you guys direct yourself to that link, I'll try and post it in the credits if we remember. I'll probably just go through each episode and try and find if we posted any links. But so it appears that some monkeys have escaped a lab with COVID-19 samples in some Planet of the Apes style raid. So India is grappling with it straight out of a movie after several monkeys raided a laboratory and escaped with COVID-19 tainted blood samples in hand.
That's bizarro world. Like, what is going on? Plot twist.
The monkeys attacked the lab technician and grabbed the samples. One of the monkeys was seen eating a surgical glove. Yeah, so that's about it. But I thought that was strange. It's like definitely Planet of the Apes or apparently 28 days later type thing. I don't know what these monkeys wanted with COVID. Maybe they were determined to spread it to eradicate the humans so they could take over.
They're evolving, dude.
They know something. They're in support of the bats.
Oh, I got one. Here we go. This is good. This is actually great. This is very what we need right now. Because in case we were wondering and thinking that things were starting to get better in some way, which I don't think anyone was. I think everyone was kind of aware that we're in the absolute eye of the shitstorm. But on Friday, North Korea vowed to build up its military force to counter what it perceives as U.S. threats and said that there will be little reason for a personal relationship between leader Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump if Washington persists with sanctions and pressure. Didn't that guy die, dude? Or did this guy fake his own death?
People just thought he was dead. Apparently he was getting like some medical procedure.
Dude,
went underground for a couple weeks.
That is hilarious. This guy just literally just disappears. The whole country thinks he's dead. He comes back. He's like, nah, just kidding. You thought.
Machiavelli, baby.
You thought.
It's funny because like when they were saying that he's dead, they're like, okay, well, if he does die or he is dead, what does that mean? And I guess his sister would come to power, and apparently she's even more of a raging bitch than he is an ass. So,
dude, could you imagine? She's just his like sister who's been neglected her whole life, looked down upon within the family, just brewing self-hate and trauma, ready to just take it out on a country that's already just been getting screwed for the past 50 years.
Oh my
How
goodness.
can it be worse than him?
Dude, right? But like, I did see that report that was like, yeah, if his sister takes over, it's going to be even worse. It's like, what do you mean even worse? It's already sucks, dude. It can get worse? Fuck. Anyways, that's what is obviously weird in the world. Because, I mean, I feel like at this point, that's inevitable. It's going to be like, we're going to go to war, but no one's going to actually want to fight the war. So it's just going to be more protest against the war. No?
Oh, this is madness. It's such madness.
Anywho.
Anyway, my turn. All right, so this is from Forbes. This is June 14th, posted by Jamie Carter. And the headline is, Scientists can now predict when our sun will wake up and get angry. It's any time now, she says.
It's any time.
She's like, our sun is asleep, but it may be waking up, and a new sun clock will tell us when that's going to occur. What do we need to know? Solar storms and their effect on our technology dominated our world. Our star has an 11-year cycle that sees it move from a period of solar minimum activity right now to its solar maximum, which is expected around the mid-2020s. So when the sun wakes up from its current slumber, solar activity will increase. So the risk of so the risk of extreme space weather is imminent. So freaking get on your aluminum tinfoil hats, boys, and put on your sunscreen because it's gonna get crazy in this bitch. So that I don't know. Is there a little jingle that goes towards the rant? Yeah.
Time for your favorite segment, Epic Rants.
All right, here we go. So here's what my rant is, and it starts off with my what's weird in the world today, because I want to look at the language that's being used. Is the sun is asleep, and it's waking up, and it's gonna get. So I love it so much. So what my rant is about is about awareness and is about consciousness, and the terminology and the words that she's using there almost makes it sound like the sun is alive, like it's a conscious thing. It's sleeping, it's gonna wake up, it's gonna get pissed off and burp at us and make all this crazy shit happen. And so like it made me think of something that I thought was really fascinating with how the universe works. So I got 3 minutes, boys, and here we go. So to me, there's something very peculiar about how rules are obeyed when it comes to particle physics and it comes to things acting the way they do, chemistry occurring the way it does. There's something really fascinating to me. It makes me think, because I look at it like as if those particles or electrons, for instance, know what they need to do, you know? So my whole kind of a concept and idea, and something that I'm kind of exploring in my mind, is like, is there levels of awareness that it's not just our self-consciousness, right? Like in Buddhism, there is the idea you might get reincarnated as a rock. Well, then that would mean that the rock is sort of conscious in some way. And then also, like for electrons, there's this thing called the wave-particle duality, where quantum mechanics demonstrates that all particles in the universe all have a field that they fluctuate in, and so they behave both as a wave and a particle. And that's the same true for photons, protons, neutrons. Every particle that we know of exists in both a wave and a particle duality. And so the whole experiment that's now made famous, and have many books come released about it, but how the electron, the electron, when it's shot through this double slit experiment. So real quick, the double slit experiment has two slits in a wall, and they shoot particles of electrons at this. And randomly, the particles will go through either the left slit or the right slit. And on the on the other side of these slits, there's a backdrop, a wall that they plant up against. And so if they were just particles, they would just be randomized, right? And they would just kind of make a scattered white noise sort of backdrop. But they don't, and they actually make a wave result, right? So it's demonstrating that these particles act as both a wave and a particle at the same time. And so the act of observing what is happening during the experiment actually causes the wave to act like a particle. So for instance, when they're looking at the experiment, the results show up as a particle. But when they're not looking at the experiment, and then they let the experiment go on and then look at the results afterwards, they see a wave. So what I'm getting at is that, to me, it sort of seems like the particles, like the electrons, are aware in some way or in some fashion or in some sense that they're being observed, right? So that was kind of what I wanted to rant about for a bit, and be like, okay, wait a minute, there seems to be like something that there's some sort of awareness that's going on in making everything exist the way it does. And I think that's incredibly trippy. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of push that a little bit out there and be like, hey, I'm kind of thinking that maybe stuff knows that it's stuff, or maybe a rock knows that it's a rock in some sense, somehow. Really woo and really, really out there and down the rabbit hole. But I think it leads really well to, this kind of whole unity, greater consciousness, everything's connected, everything's unified explanation of what's going on with everything and the universe and us and beingness and existence and all that sort of stuff. That there are levels of awareness that I think are overlooked, that doesn't mean maybe just life. Maybe, maybe particles know they're particles in some sense. That's what I'm thinking. Mic drop. Mic drop. Can you hear it?
Okay.
Okay. I'll leave that for you guys think about it.
All right, so that wraps up another excellent episode of the See What Sticks podcast. You guys can check us out on our website, seewhatsticks.net. Check out the blog posts and the archived podcast when we get them up there. Go to Facebook, See What Sticks Variety Podcast, Instagram, See What Sticks Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, See What Sticks 01, or YouTube at See What Sticks, a Variety Podcast. Signing off for the guys, I'm Jameson Andrews. Joe and Jackson, can't wait for the next episode.
Likewise. It's been fun, guys.
Thanks a lot.